All right, thank you. A little snafu, no worries. From what I understand, this is the last talk before lunch, so I'll try to go quick. But I'm going to try to go quick so that way we can leave a little bit of time at the end for questions. I really enjoyed the last talk because I spent 11 years and 7 months myself in the United States Marine Corps from 2003 to 2014. And it was upon exiting the Marine Corps that I decided I wanted a new path in life, a new direction, and a different career. And for some foolish reason, I decided to choose beekeeping. And it was about year 3 of that venture that I met Megan, and I've known her, of course, ever since. And so she asked me to come up and give this talk. And I asked her, I said, Megan, what do you want me to talk about? And she said, we'll just talk about commercial beekeeping. I'm like, okay. Like, well, what do you want me to say about it? She's like, I don't know. Come up with something. Like, well, that's an awful lot of trust, especially if you know me personally. But I said, I think I got a pretty good idea. So what I aim to do today is to give you a little bit of snapshot about what the commercial beekeeping industry is like, some of the practices and things that you may not be familiar with. And then I'm going to branch out and talk about my own journey as I've traveled through, being a hobby beekeeper, and then increasing my number of hives, buying more equipment, buying different equipment, and eventually getting up to the level where I'm at now, and some of the lessons that I've learned along the ways, maybe some things that people don't talk about or don't necessarily think about. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into it. So just to give you a broad picture, now some of these terms and figures I'm going to be using are going to be referring to beekeeping nationally, but really what I'm focusing on when we talk about a year in review is for a commercial beekeeper based out of Michigan. So nationally, we've got probably about 2.5 million hives in apiaries that are 5 hives or more, and about 2 million of those are probably operated in a commercial capacity. And most of these commercial operations are migratory. Of course, there's some based out of the southern United States that don't have to move, but again, we're thinking about Michigan here. So we're going to say most of our commercial operations in Michigan are going to be migratory, and the bulk of their economic activities are going to be, pollination and bulk honey sales. So let's talk about migration and being migratory, because the first thing that we always have to worry about when we're Michigan beekeepers is what? Winter. We all think about winter because if you're on top of it, we know that overwintering starts in April, right? Well, it's not necessarily that much different for commercial beekeeping, but you do get a little bit of a break going south where the weather is significantly warmer. So migrations exist to extend the season a little bit, but primarily that's to get them closer to pollination routes, and we'll talk more about pollination later. And in order to get this job done, you're going to need specialized hive and material handlers. You're going to need to load it on the truck and get it strapped down, and then you're going to need to handle the transport aspect of it. So there's a lot of moving factors here. So just to give you guys a real quick idea, when you're talking about a 48-foot step deck trailer hooked up to a tractor, you're probably going to fit close to 400 to 440 hives on there and gross about 80,000 pounds total. That's a lot of bees, and that is a lot of weight. Now, I don't know about you, but I certainly would not want to do that by hand at all. My back hurts enough as it is. Thank you, Marine Corps. So, in order to do that, you're probably going to want to have a machine. Now, you can see here in the top right photo, that's my own personal bobcat. And this bobcat is specially suited for beekeeping because I built that funny little attachment on the back that's called a fifth wheel or crazy wheel, wacky wheel. It's got a lot of different names. Bobcat used to make those back in the day, but you will see most bobcats in commercial beekeeping outfits hooked up like that. They'll probably have a forklift mast on the front there instead of loader arms. One of these days we'll get there. And then on the bottom left-hand picture, we can see I'm operating a swinger or a Hummer bee, the articulated style of forklift to load and unload bees. That's really the Cadillac of bee movers. It's very easy to see from, got great visibility, and they work really well. And it's nice because they typically have side shift masts on them for getting those loads really tight on the truck. Very much enjoy using those. Now, when it comes to loading these bees, you can see that they're on pallets. So when we're moving bees across the country, the most effective way to do it is going to be on a 2, 4, 6, or 8-way pallets. Most predominantly, you're going to see 4-way and 6-way pallets for moving bees across the country. And that would just be the best way to do it, because, again, if we had to load these individually by hand, it would take us forever to get the job done. Once you get them on the truck, we've got to do something to secure these hives. I oftentimes say, a lot of times when people ask me, are you going to strap that? I said, nah, Jesus holds my stuff down. But anyway, we need to secure this load. We need to get them strapped down. So the first thing that you're going to do is you're going to put a net over top of the entire length of the load, all the way down to the sides. And you're going to secure that net to the deck of the trailer the best that you can, in order to make sure that we're not getting bees escaping. Now, the purpose of this net, of course, is to keep the bees on the load, but it's also going to provide a space in between those hives and the outside world, where they will be able to come out and beard on those hives to cool themselves off. Because something that you may not think about in your own apiary, but when you load that many hives onto a truck, those brood nests are all 94.5 degrees, no matter what. So that load is going to generate heat, and a lot of it. So that net is going to allow air to get in and out, and also we allot for a space going down the center of the load, so there's airflow going down the center, and those center hives can beard out. So once that net is on there, boards will go over top of the net, and then we'll put straps over top of the boards to kind of sandwich everything down to the truck, and it's ready to go. So with all of that heat that we talked about, do you think we're doing a lot of long stops during the daytime? Absolutely not. If you've got bees on there and it's the daytime, you are rolling. Might want to consider how much water you drink before you get in the truck. Because if you stop at a truck stop and you've got a bad net job and you're losing a lot of bees that are trying to get out and forage or trying to get out and cool out, when you take off, you're going to leave about 3 pounds of bees hanging off one of those pumps, and you may not be so well received the next time you try to pull into that truck stop, and you might just get bee trucks banned from there altogether. So it's definitely on you to make sure that your load is secure and that you're not going to be causing problems as you make your way across the country. Probably one of the scariest things I ever did was get fuel in the middle of the day in New Mexico. That was one of those. The light came down from the sky, and there was only one pump open, and every other pump had 2 semis behind it. So we talked about how migration, when we migrate, it does extend the season, but it also gets you closer to the pollination routes. Pollination in the United States is a $19 billion industry annually. That involves, of course, everybody. I wish I could just get 19 billion myself and do all the work, but it takes a lot of different beekeepers to get that job done. And one of the main reasons why that industry is so big and there's so much money is that because 80% of the world's almonds, I'm talking about the US here, 80% of the entire world's almonds come from the Central Valley of California. And it takes nearly 2 million honeybee colonies in order to accomplish that task and get all that pollination done. So those pollination rates come at a premium when you're talking about nearly every commercial colony in the United States making a migration out there. And then furthermore, we have over 100 crops that are produced annually in the United States. They're going to require pollination from a managed pollinator of some sorts. So getting the bees down south, extending that season so you can do more management in the fall and so that you can get those brood nests built up in the springtime is one of the key reasons for pollination, because almond pollination brokers, they're going to be looking for 8 frames of good bees out of commercial beekeepers or better. So when you can get that brood nest going in January, it's a lot better off. So bulk honey and wax sales, think about this. We've produced 125 million pounds roughly in 2022. That's the figure I was able to look up. And that's sold, I believe I mistyped that. It's supposed to be 296 was the actual number. But about anywhere from $2.50 to $3 a pound is usually what they're getting for honey in a 55-gallon drum if you are selling to a bulk packager or something like that. So we can see why that is not really the greatest thing when it comes down to honey production. You can't make nearly as much money as you can during pollination if you have the right rotation set up. And then the funny number here at the bottom is that we consume about 450 million pounds annually as a nation. So if we made 125 and we ate 450, where did the rest of it come from? Somewhere else. And because we don't have a lot of tariffs or taxes or imports on that honey that's coming in, that has a lot to do with why those prices for bulk honey is so low. So if there's anything to cry to a legislator about, that would probably be the one. So we'll talk about a year in review here, basically how your calendar year would work out if we're in Michigan. Now I know it's October right now, but I wanted to start with spring because that brings me a lot more happiness than thinking about winter. So in April to May is when you're going to be bringing your bees back up from your southern bee yards. And what you're going to be doing is you're going to be prepping those hives for pollination. You'll be feeding them up if they need it, doing any splits, any grading that you need to do, and getting them ready to get out in orchards and pollinate. Us ourselves, we pollinate apples, but you could pollinate apples, blueberries, cherries, the list goes on in the early springtime. After we get that, May is over and the autumn olive is starting to peter out and we're coming into June. That's when we're going to go ahead and in June, July, start pulling some of that spring honey to make room. And then in July, we're going to be getting those supers back on there and getting everything ready. You'll probably have to feed during that time too. One of the best advice that I've got so far was feed your bees. Feed, feed, feed. So in August and September, we're going to go ahead and start pulling those supers of the last honey of summer and fall, get that stuff processed, and then get the hives prepped for migration. I mean, that's pretty much exactly what it would sound like. We'll be going through them and looking for any hives that are diseased or maybe we think wouldn't survive or make it, and make any combinations that we would need to, and basically get the petals equalized and ready to go. And then October, November, we would get them loaded up on the truck, head down south, and once down there, we can do our last kind of management for the year. I'm hoping to make some fall splits myself once we get down south. And then in the December to January time frame is when you're going to be feeding those bees up and getting them ready to go so they can head on out to California to pollinate almonds. Again, they're looking for like 8 frames of brood. And based off of how good your bees look is going to be dependent on how much you get paid for your pollination contracts. And then once you get them back in February to March timeframe from California from pollinating almonds is when you're going to go ahead and perform your spring splits and haul them back up here. I do know that there's a couple different beekeepers that would haul their bees directly from California back to Michigan and not make a stop in their winter yard. And then there's also some considerations that a lot of beekeepers now are overwintering. There's overwintering barns out in Utah, and I think there's some in Idaho too along that area. And those certainly have their benefits for overwintering, but me personally, I don't seem to take much issue with going to Georgia when it's wintertime in Michigan. I haven't had any complaints about that yet, except for one error that I made was I purchased a camper without air conditioning thinking, what use would that be in the winter? And then it was 80 degrees in February, and that was a surprise. So that's kind of a brief synopsis of what is going on. Most of the other activities that are occurring are pretty much the same thing that you would be doing when it comes down to just inspecting hives, treating for mites and other diseases and pests, the same thing that you would be doing, but we work on a regimented timeline of when certain things have to happen and getting the ball rolling so we can accomplish this yearly task. So you might be asking yourself like, hey, I've been working at this for a while. I really enjoy bees. Maybe I want to go commercial. Well, I promise you we're going to end on a high note, but I do have a few stark warnings along the way, just lessons learned and things that I've gleaned over the years. First off, I started out with nothing, and I still have most of it left. That's all I can say about that. I really did start out with nothing. I love this picture. This picture is of my 4-frame Chinesium hand crank extractor and my 3 hives sitting in our back pasture. I think in this picture we just harvested spring honey. We put the wet supers back on and we're getting ready for summer honey. You can see there's a little bit of spotted knapweed blooming here in the bottom right hand of the photo. That makes me really happy when I look at that, because you always look at like, man, this is where I want to be. Well, sometimes you need to take a stop and look back and see where you came from. So this is where I came from, absolutely nothing. And it takes a lot to get up to where I'm at now, and I don't even consider myself a commercial beekeeper right now. I consider myself a sideliner because at my peak of season, I'm only running about 100 hives, and to be commercial, you really ought to be 300, but probably 400 because that's a complete load. And it's been a long, strange journey and an expensive one. So just to give you guys a quick figure of some of the money I spent, and just so you know, I didn't know that I spent this either. I made this slide, and when I did, it was really sobering. Like, oh, that's what happens when you operate without a budget. So, this is all equipment that is essential to my operation that I need for bees, but it's not, it's not deep supers, it's not feeders, it's not anything like that. My glorious, nice and new 1992 F350, she's a peach. We spent about $6,000 buying the truck, performing the repairs to it, and getting it set up for beekeeping. Our 98 Freightliner FL70, that's not even done yet. And so far, the purchase of the truck, the flatbed, everything, we have about $10,000 invested to that. Our 1978 Bobcat, because only the newest and finest equipment for us. 1978 Bobcat, we probably got about $9,000 into that, and that includes the fifth wheel that I hand built to go on there. I believe there's only one company in the entire country that makes those fifth wheels, and it's Tropic Trailer in Florida. But 32 frame extractor, because that 4-frame hand crank, that's not going to do it anymore. We spent about $2,500 on that. On capping machine to keep it fed, $5,500. Notice that there's not a sump or a pump on there. If you are selling a sump or a pump, see me after the presentation. I'd love to talk to you. So, if you're not real good at quick math, that's about $33,000 that I somehow let slip through my fingers in the last 3 years. Whoops. Trust me, it's all worth it. So, just to give you another take at it, though, you might say, okay, well, why don't you just rent some of this stuff? And you can absolutely do that, but I promise you without a shadow of a doubt that you will be very hard-pressed to find anywhere in the country that's going to rent you a skid steer with a fifth wheel on the back. That's not going to happen. Bobcat hasn't made those for decades. And the yellow truck that we have pictured here, that is not my Freightliner. That is a Penske rental. First off, let me tell Penske they rent only the finest trucks that are in the best condition and never, ever, ever break down. So the problem with renting a skid steer is you're not going to have a fifth wheel on there, so it's going to be very difficult for you to move bees around. That fifth wheel is going to take the bob out of the cat and the skid out of the steer. So you won't be tearing up the ground, you won't be shaking up your bees. In addition to that, the rental truck, as lovely as it is with its little idiosyncrasies, every single flatbed rental truck company in America, every one of their trucks has a Tommy gate, lift gate on the back. So you can't pull a trailer with it, so Bobcat has to stay at home. Whoops. And then not a single truck leasing or rental company in the United States will do point-to-point rental on a flatbed. So if I were to rent that truck, take my bees to Georgia, I can't turn in that truck in Georgia like if you were renting a moving truck. I would have to drive it, empty, deadhead, all the way back to Michigan. And fun fact, that truck gets the exact same fuel economy it does empty as it does loaded. And spoiler alert, there's only one digit in that number, unless you're going to include a decimal point. I don't know if you guys checked, but diesel's $4.16 a gallon. So you're going to have to pay to rent that truck, and then on top of that, you're going to have to pay a mileage rate too. And that mileage rate and that rental rate is going to be pretty much dependent on how long you're going to have it. But when I migrated the very first time when we went to Arizona and I rented old Chiquita there, I believe we were paying somewhere to the tune of $450 a week and about 12 or 14 cents a mile, and it was 1,600 miles one way on our trip. So the costs certainly do add up. So you need to if you're thinking about doing this seriously, you need to think a lot about your budget and how you're going to be able to sustain this, because renting equipment will work out to a certain extent, but it's not without its own problems. And also you're subject to availability too, so that's a big issue. And we haven't even gotten into the point to what are you going to do when you make a whole bunch of splits and now you have to put supers on them. Did you know that those are expensive? I didn't until I added them all up. They got real expensive real fast. So one of the things you really need to take into account if you decide that, hey, I'm going to go from 5 or 10 hives, I want to start upping my numbers and I want to have some serious numbers and eventually become a sideliner and maybe a commercial operation and adopt those practices, well, your location really matters. And I found that out the hard way when I started gaining in size, because the fact of the matter is, and this is something that really isn't talked about, especially amongst new beekeepers, but it needs to, and that's that you need to know who your neighbors are. And I'm not talking about the Joneses or the Smiths and whether or not they have a pool and the bees are going to be flying into that pool or not. I don't care. I know the bees are going to fly into their pool. I just act surprised when they call. But the reality of it is you need to know who the commercial beekeepers are around you, because this industry is not a competition industry. You don't move in and outcompete somebody. Sure, that happens, but it's not ethical and it doesn't follow the morals of commercial beekeeping. It's a community that's very tight-knit and most people know everybody else around them, and reputations really will precede themselves. And you could pop up overnight like I did and get a whole bunch of hives overnight like I did, and now my problem is that I'm stacked in by commercial beekeepers all around me. So it's very difficult for me to place bees and find places to keep them. Now, Michigan doesn't require you by law to register your apiaries and where your yards are at. And I know that there's some people that are kind of requesting for that and working for that. And I'm sure the motives behind that are very good. But as far as I'm concerned, you might as well be asking me which bedroom my children sleep in. It's not going to happen. I will not give you that information. So how do you figure out where to put your bees? Seems like a reasonable question to ask. Well, the answer is you're actually going to have to go around and meet people. Aw, shucks. You're going to have to be civil, and you're going to have to meet people and say, hi, can I get your phone number? I'm looking to place bees. So-and-so said I could put bees on their property over here, and I wanted to know if you had any yards in that area. And they'll either tell you no, or I've got a yard about 2.5 miles from there, which is a really polite way to say, buzz off. And it's really important that you consider that when you put in your bee yards as you increase in number and you have more hives than you can keep in any one spot. And in addition to that, you're probably going to want your bee yards, when you set them up, to be out of the view of the public eye or anybody else but the landlord. And the reason for that is going to be theft and vandals, because I don't know what's wrong. Maybe someone didn't get hugged enough as a child, but they saw a beehive placed precariously close to the road and they just felt like hitting it with their vehicle. I don't know what's wrong with them. I'm sure you don't either, but it is a threat. So you want to keep these things sheltered, keep them safe, keep them secret. And so we don't have the problems of theft or vandals. Now, most of the time when I'm talking about theft, that's probably going to occur in pollination, when it's placed outside of the yard and it's just kind of placed at the end of a row in maybe an orchard or an almond grove or something like that. But they will get stolen out of bee yards. And then your other hazards, which are probably going to be of the four-legged variety. And when we're talking about Michigan, that's going to be your skunks and your bears. And as far as your skunks go, you know, you can live trap them and relocate them if you want. 110 conibear works better. It is what it is. And then, of course, we have to worry about yogi. And, you know, if you're in an area where you think that you might have a bear threat, I strongly recommend that you preemptively put up a fence. Don't wait for that first bear attack to happen, because once you've done that, you've established a behavior, and the only thing that's going to stop that behavior in most cases is the 3 S's. If you don't know what that is, come talk to me afterwards. So, it's time for even some more bummer stuff. You know, things might be going great in your own apiary right now, and you're like, man, wouldn't this be cool if I didn't have to go into the office and listen to Deborah talk about her kids anymore, and I could just work bees all day long? That sounds ideal. And so you work at it and you start getting up in numbers, but what you run into is you're on a very close teetering scale between your skill and ability and losing everything because you've made a critical error that you haven't foreseen. So the best advice I can give is to grow very slowly and grow organically with your bees, and don't try to make massive gains or increases unless you have the financial ability to support that, either with equipment or with the labor to help you get the job done, because it is a big job, and very quickly your practices can start to slide and you're going to find yourself in a bit of area of trouble when you can't, say, manage for mites properly or get your honey pulled on time or something like that, and you could eventually end up losing everything. And another thing is that migrating doesn't necessarily mean like that's going to solve my overwintering problems, because it's not. I mean, I've migrated hives to warmer climates and still lost them just because I wasn't on top of their mites well enough. Maybe there were some other factors, but you can see in the bottom right-hand corner that photo of me standing in beautiful Michigan circa January, probably 2019. No wraps on the hives. We've got shims and we've got dry sugar on top. And it was my prerogative that we weren't migrating until I knew how to keep bees alive in the wintertime. And that's really what it breaks down to, is migrating and trying to do all those things. It's not an excuse for poor animal husbandry. Just because you have more hives doesn't mean that you're going to have a higher ratio of success. And one of the biggest gut checks I got was the very first time that I migrated. I decided that I was going to take 40 strong colonies that I had and add on 40 colonies or so from another beekeeper, and we were going to join forces and drive those out to the Stanfield area of Arizona, south of Phoenix, and set them up. Now, I should have done a lot more info, but I was sheepish and I just was happy to have a place for them to go. So all I got was a Google map pin. This is where they're going. So we drive Chiquita down there, we offload the bees, and it's in between 2 sorghum fields. Because this is Arizona, they've got dairies out there in the desert, and they're raising sorghum for silage. Okay, I didn't know anything about sorghum. I'm from Michigan. And so I started driving back, and I'm sitting at a truck stop, eating some wonderful fare from the roller items, I'm sure. And looking at my phone, I'm like, I wonder what value sorghum can be to my bees that I just set down there, that I drove 1,600 miles from Michigan. And that was when I learned that sorghum has a neonicotinoid pesticide put into the seed coating, and it's uptaken systemically by the sorghum for the aphids. So the end of the article was saying, if you have your bees buy sorghum, you should move it immediately. Good to know. Yeah. So 30 days later, when I returned, 78% of my bees were dead. 78%. And that was really hard. It was very difficult. It was emotional. It was draining to have invested so much and come so far and lost all of that hard work. Because at one point in time, I had run out of money, and these were bees that I had made from collecting them out of walls and raising my own queens. Getting too much feedback. Okay. Hey. I was going to say, I'm deaf, but I know that something was going wrong with that microphone. A lot of people think I'm excited all the time. I really just don't know how loud I'm talking. So we lost 78% of our bees, so what are you supposed to do? I mean, at that point in time, it seemed awful attractive just to sell the pallets and the hive bodies and everything right there in the Phoenix Valley and peel out. But the problem is I'm just too tough or too dumb to quit. I haven't figured it out yet. And so we bought some singles and we bolstered our numbers and we got back going. But one of the key takeaways that I got out of that was I share that story whenever I speak with a commercial beekeeper that I'm talking to and trying to gain some information from. And every time I share that story with them, they share with me a story about how there was a time when they maybe went from 2,500 colonies down to 250. Mm-hmm. That's a hell of a kick in the teeth. Instead of dropping 78% of 40, isn't it? So that was a really good lesson to learn at 40 hives. That was a lot easier to take and a lot easier to recover from than it was when I was at 400 hives. So just because things are going well and you think that everything's perfect and it's just sunshine and rainbows, you can get humbled very quickly, very quickly. So grow slow and grow with your bees. And this is my last slide here. It is probably the most important one of the entire slideshow when I'm talking about my lessons learned, okay? Lessons learned. The top photo here is of my youngest son, Walter. And in this photo, we can see that Walter has been popped squarely in the eye by a honeybee and still manages to eke out a little bit of a smile. And he was back into the bees later on that day. Tough trooper. Couldn't ask for a more dedicated helper out in the bee yard. Except for maybe my wife, Nicole. She can lift heavier stuff. I'm trying to get him to eat more, but it's a struggle. And then the other takeaway, the bottom right-hand photo is the top of a hive in the second box that I opened up. And we can see that it's absolutely plumb full of bees. You can barely see the frames in there. And I probably dumped close to 1.5 pounds of bees off of the lid that were just clinging to it in front of the hive. And that was a split that I was checking back in on 30 days after I had made it. And it's just truly breathtaking to see such a big, strong, and beautiful hive. And the only reason that that hive looks like that is because I had mentors that got me there. I would not be where I am without my mentors. So I'm pretty sure that I ended a little bit early. Yep, so we got a couple times for questions. So thank you, everybody. I'm going to go ahead and just real quick before we get into questions, if you're looking to get a hold of me, I'm located in Kent City, Michigan. Can't miss it. There's no stoplight. We do have early spring nuke sales. There are pre-orders, so you can pre-order your nukes off of our website. That'll be up in the January to February time frame. My web address is hickorytreefarmapiaries@gmail.com, and my web address is hickorytreefarmapiaries.com. And you can reach me at the phone number below. That's direct to my cell phone. So questions? Yes, sir.
Yes, speak about your time commitment throughout the year.
My time commitment? There's not enough. Because the problem is when you're working on a tight budget, you have all of the constraints that everybody else does when it comes to working hives. That work doesn't go away. It only piles up on you. So you got to be very quick when you're going through hives. You're not sitting there examining every frame. What you're doing for is you're looking for disease, you're looking for strength, you're looking for what they need, how that brood nest is looking, are they queen right, and making a note of what they need, because you will forget. You have to take notes, at least at the bare minimum, write something on the lid, and you're moving on. And then throughout all of that, unless for some crazy reason you got a heck of a bankroll, you're changing the oil on the trucks, you're repairing whatever broke on the truck last, you're repairing whatever broke on the Bobcat, you're building new equipment. So it's a constant struggle, and what I have learned is that when you're trying to adopt these commercial practices and do this work and get through it, it's pretty much just saying next week things will slow down over and over and over again until you die. Does that answer your question? Okay. Yes, sir.
You said feed. Could you elaborate on what you do?
Yes, if they're not pulling in nectar, you need to be feeding them, because that is going to stimulate their response to continue growing that brood nest and getting strong. And syrup is cheaper than honey, so we're trying to make money. So pull the honey off and give them syrup. And I've heard tons of bad stuff when I was a hobby beekeeper about feeding, like, oh, they should be eating honey and this and that. You can put a tote of syrup out, and you can put out a frame of honey. If there is a flow on, they're going to ignore that frame of honey that's sitting out, and they're going to be eating off the syrup, or they're going to be eating off of the natural forage that's in the area, because nutritionally that's what they prefer. I liken it to canned green beans. I absolutely love the green beans in my garden. I love to can them, so I have a little bit of summer to enjoy during those cold, dark winter months. But you better believe that the fresh green beans are what I look forward to the most. So it's important that we have honey on them to eat and to live. But pulling honey off when they're not bringing any in and feeding them syrup so they continue to grow is the way to get big, healthy colonies and to get a bountiful honey crop.
You raise your own queens, and where would you requeen in your migratory?
So I raise my own queens, and I've been doing that for probably about 5 or 6 years now. And I graft my queens, and I start them in a cell starter, finisher, and then incubator, and then eventually I'll put the cells in the hives. And I usually start hives from cells, and what I'll do is I'll either pinch the queen in the parent hive, or I'll move her to the split and give the parent hive a cell. And that's just done based off of need. If a hive gets too big, they need to be split. So be it. It's going to make more money if I split them than if they are hanging in the trees. Any other questions? Yes?
Thoughts between feeding sugar syrup and Pro Sweet?
Okay, so sugar syrup versus Pro Sweet. I never used Pro Sweet. I have used HFCS 55, which I guess is pretty similar to Pro Sweet. I was concerned about that myself, and so I did my own research, And if you really wanna get into the super finite details of it, it probably is a little bit better to just feed them regular sugar syrup. But the data that I read said that HFCS 55 might cause mild gut irritation, might. So does and might are two different things, so we're gonna go ahead and take the money aspect of it at this point in time. Any other questions? In the back, yes.
Your pollination of pollen, what pollination of monocrop, is that like affecting the bees once you bring them out?
Is the pollination of a monocrop affecting the bees when they come out? That would be, that's kind of a loaded question because it's a yes and a no. Because what has been described to me is that almond pollen is very nutritional and beneficial to the bees, although I can speak from personal experience, the honey tastes terrible. But not all pollens are created equal. Dandelions are great, and so are maples, but they don't really have all the nutrition that our bees need, and so that's why we're feeding protein patties and stuff like that in the springtime to help them out. And so when it comes down to a monocrop, it can be very helpful, like in the case of almonds, but a lot of beekeepers report issues when they pollinate blueberries. And I think that has a lot less to do with the pollen quality of the blueberries, and more so the practices potentially of the blueberry grower and what sprays and antifungals that they might be using leading up to that pollination. So it can be beneficial, or it could be bad depending on other outside factors. But I don't see the pollen itself or the fact of it being a monocrop itself being directly a problem, especially because I don't have any control over those bees, and if they're not getting the nutrition that they want out of whatever crop they're pollinating, they'll probably go find it someplace else. Yes?
Okay, one more. Are the queens that you're raising, are they here in Michigan? And what month do you do your grafting?
I raise queens in Georgia and in Michigan, and I raise queens as I feel needed. Yes?
At what point did you quit your day job and decide that this is what you wanted to do full time?
Oh, at what point?
Yeah.
Oh, I quit that a long time ago.
Okay. How far did you get into it before you realized that this is what the path you wanted to go instead of?
Well, that's kind of a slippery slope because I quit really early when I didn't have a lot of hives and started working at it. But that was because I had a lot of outside factors that also factored into that decision. But I would say it's a pretty difficult task for someone to balance a full-time workload with keeping bees, with welding and fabricating attachments for equipment and maintaining trucks and all that. So my recommendation again would be grow slow until you can budget yourself out a way to support yourself through the year, because the fact of the matter is any increases that you make are going to have high costs associated with them, and then in addition to that, you're probably looking in all actuality a 1-year return on investment. So it's a big deal. My wife works at a vet clinic. I can promise you the dogs and cats have better health care than I do. There's sacrifices. When they get sick, they go to the doctor. I use duct tape. So if you want to handle it yourself and you want to get into it, I highly recommend it, but just make sure that you're able to support your lifestyle how you see fit.
Thank you for your service also.
Thank you.
Thank you to all of our speakers. We're going to come back here at 1:30, so this is your lunch break. If you don't know where to go find lunch, if you find the agenda for the conference online, there's a link and it has local lunch options. Thank you.